step into the presentation. But good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Steve Barker. I work for the Planning Advisory Service. I've been doing a lot of work over the last few years around design codes and placemaking, as well as some of the work around local plans stuff as well. I'm really kind of pleased that you understand. I'm really kind of pleased that MHCLG colleagues have made themselves available to kind of talk through the design and placemaking and practice guidance. It came out for consultation in January. That consultation is aligned with the MPPF consultation that came out just before Christmas, closing date of the 10th of March. It's a great opportunity just to kind of talk through the content of the planning and practice guidance, but also kind of talk through the kind of content of the consultation as well, and sort of some of those linkages across as well between that and the MPPF. You'll see on the screen there's a QR code or access link to Slido. We're taking all the questions today through that, so please do take the opportunity to post questions up. The way we're going to work today is we're going to have a bit of a presentation from MHCLG colleagues. Then we're going to go through the questions that have been posted up through Slido. And I'm really pleased as well that Stephen Kirby from the Southwest Design and Place Network and Sky Mars as well from the Northeast Design and Place Network can join us as well. So we're going to have a bit of an update on the networks as well that PAS and MHCLG have been supporting. A number of people signed up today are in those groups. If you're not, there's a great opportunity to join those networks that go. Great place to kind of share thoughts and comments, particularly as we're going through a new period of change with new guidance coming out. And policy coming out as we progress through the year. So, Nina, can you just move on to the next slide for me? Yeah, great. Thank you. So we're in webinar mode, so we're expecting quite a lot of people on today. So there's no cameras or microphones, but the chat function is off. But we're taking questions through Slido. I can see lots of questions being added or upvoted, which is great. We'll try and get through as many as we can within the session today. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions that are posted or comment on all of the statements that get made, these all get passed on to MHCLG and they are very useful to do. So please do take that opportunity to post stuff up. We will be leaving the Slido open after the event until about 20th of February. So if you're going through and you've got things that you want to add in, please feel free to do so. It is a useful opportunity just to corral some thoughts and things like that. So do take a look at that. Nina, next slide, please. So, yeah, as we mentioned today, with the agenda for today, we're going to be kind of doing a bit of an overview from MHCLG colleagues. I'm really pleased that Lucy Seymour-Bowdry and Holly Lang and Joanne Preston from MHCLG have made themselves available to kind of go through those, and then we'll take some of the questions. And then we'll go and have a little chat about the networks and some of the work that's been going on through those as well, and then wrap up for the end of the session. So, okay, Nina, next slide, please. Okay, brilliant. In which case, now I think I will hand over to Lucy, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Seymour-Bowdry. I'm a planner within the design and placemaking team at MHCLG. And I'm going to give a brief introduction to the design and placemaking PPG. So, Nina, could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so following the introduction, I'll then look at 3 different sections. They're all focused around the 3 topics that we're asking in our consultation, and then we'll move on to next steps. So firstly, I'm going to set the context of the guidance update. So on the next slide, we've set out some of the key changes, the proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. This is really to highlight the current consultation on the MPPF. The overarching aim for the reforms is to demand better from the planning system. This is through simplification and standardisation of policy, guidance, processes and standards at the national level. And so the changes include some restructuring to present national policy more clearly and make it more rules-based, with the chapters now split into plan making and decision making policies. And the main proposed design related changes are set out in chapter 14, Achieving Well-Designed Places. And these changes will provide greater clarity on embedding design and placemaking in development plans at the most appropriate level. They set out to align key decision-making principles with our emerging design and placemaking PPG and provide greater emphasis on design quality throughout the delivery process, including a firm stance on design review. And then there are some key areas that intersect with design policy, including spatial development strategies and supplementary plans. Just to pause on supplementary plans, because we've had quite a few questions, it's safe to say, in these sessions. So to clarify, there are 3 sources of information that you can look at currently on supplementary plans. The first is the MPPF consultation itself, which sets out how the government wants supplementary plans to be used. There's no sort of surprises in this section because they set out how to prepare supplementary plans in the examination, and this goes over the same ground as was confirmed in February last year in the consultation response on the subject. Secondly, there's further information in the regulations explainer document that was published in November, and this is available on gov.uk, sets out the intended content of the regulations. And our colleagues have assured us that the regulations themselves will be out soon. And thirdly, the primary legislation itself was part of the LURA. This will be switching those provisions on at the same time as the new plan making system. There are provisions in it about how supplementary plans can cover design and also the circumstances in which they can allocate a site or more than one site for development. So that's a bit of an update from our local plans colleagues on supplementary plans. I know there's some questions as well that we'll be answering after the presentation on the PPG. But just back to the MPPF then on the slide, there are other sections relating to design. We know that design is cross-cutting. There's many areas that intersect. We've highlighted a few here on the slide. So this includes historic environment, transport, natural environment, and the effective use of land. And as Steve has mentioned, the consultation on the MPPF runs until the 10th of March. So that's really just to set the scene and the overall overarching policy context in which we'll be introducing this guidance update. So the draft design and placemaking planning practice guidance, or PPG, as we abbreviate it to, this has been published to support the implementation of the draft MPPF. It consolidates 4 of our existing guidance documents into a single streamlined resource. These are the National Design Guide, the Design Processes and Tools PPG, the National Model Design Codes Part 1 and 2. So it's those 4 documents. Once we publish the final version of this PPG, it will replace those 4. And this approach has been informed by user feedback and what we found through the Design Code Pathfinder programme. And we also spoke to a number of you through a series of design practitioners networks meetings, and that was really helpful in kind of testing our emerging approach. The overall aim of this update is to make design guidance clearer, more accessible, and easier to apply in practice. So we're seeking views on whether this consolidated approach improves usability and supports the preparation of effective design and placemaking policies, tools, and processes. So as mentioned, we have structured this session around the consultation questions, which we'll bring together at the end. Feedback is generally being sought on the practical application of the guidance rather than its overall content. But I'll explain what's in the content so you can understand how it's been consolidated. The first topic we're seeking feedback on the consultation is the usability of the guidance. And there's 2 consultation questions there that relate to that topic. So here's a diagram that shows the relationship between national policy and our updated design PPG. And the design and placemaking PPG illustrates the government's priorities for well-designed places, helping local authorities make planning decisions, and developers and architects submit planning applications to local authorities. The guidance is formed of 3 parts. So as you can see on the left-hand side there, there's sort of 3 boxes where the design and placemaking PPG is. Part 1 sets out the 7 features of well-designed places and their intended design and placemaking outcomes, which we'll explore in the next slide. It explains how design principles for each features should inform the preparation of plans, design policies, guidance, and proposals for new development. And it also informs planning decisions where relevant, including in the absence of local design policies, design codes, or design guides. Part 2 of the guidance sets out how design quality can be integrated through the plan-making process and how it is considered in decision-making. It also provides guidance on the various design tools and processes within the planning system. And this is where our guidance on community engagement sits. And part 3 explains how local design codes can set technical requirements for different design issues and provides guidance on applying design codes appropriately across different scales and contexts. And on the right-hand side there of the slide, you can also see that we intend to publish a series of model design codes, which will be expanded over time to create a catalogue of template design codes, which local planning authorities can apply or adapt to the local context. You'll hear more about model design codes from Joe and Holly. So on the next slide, you'll see that to inform our guidance update, we undertook a review of the 10 characteristics of well-designed places, which are part of the existing design guidance. So you can see the wheel on the left-hand side there. And we've simplified and consolidated these characteristics to become the 7 features of well-designed places, so the wheel on the right. The main changes we are making are to provide a stronger people focus, combining content in the existing guidance into a single section on livability, which is the degree to which a place is suitable or good for living in. We then have another new feature, which is climate, and this incorporates both new and existing content. You can see in the diagram how we've combined some of the existing 10 characteristics into those 2 new features. And then to ensure continuity and minimize the number of changes, the remaining 5 features are all as titled previously. So nature, movement, built form, public space, and identity. And you'll see from the draft text of policy DP3 in the NPPF that we're consulting on, that context is still very much a priority too. When reviewing the 10 characteristics, we heard that the context one was a bit confusing and conflated design as a process with design as an output. So what we've done is move context out of the wheel and added a section on context in each of the 7 features, meaning that it's now a thread that runs throughout the guidance as well as being in the draft NPPF policy. So in part 1, if we look at the next slide on livability, this is an example of how one of the 7 features is presented in part 1, and there's a section on each of them. You can see on this livability example, there's an introduction setting out what the feature is, and then we have set out what makes a livable place and how this can be achieved through planning and design. And on the second page, we've then set out specific considerations for understanding the context, as I mentioned, in relation to the feature. In this case, it's how people use the space. And then the main content for each feature is an index for each design principle, in this case, L1, effective use of land. And these are the design principles you would use to develop a local policy, for example. The key phrase in each of the 7 features before the principles is that local design policies and guidance for development proposals should address the following design principles. And this is repeated for each feature. You then have the remaining principle in the index. So for livability, there's L1 to L6, and for climate, C1 to C4, etc., etc. And this is using the same approach that we've used before in the National Design Guide. So moving on to part 2 of the guidance, this draws on content from the Design Process and Tools, PPG, and the National Model Design Code Part 1. It aims to give further clarity through updates and by providing steps for preparing other design tools as well as design codes, and further clarity on design in the plan making section from the previous PPG, and also updating and expanding on this to reflect updates to the NPPF and local plan making framework. And we've brought this all into one place to show how a spatial approach to design can ensure quality is considered at every stage of the planning process. This diagram from the draft PPG sets out the various steps and the key sections within part 2. As you can see on the left of the diagram there, we've used 6 steps in the design process. So the first is resource, creating a resource plan to prepare, test, adopt, and implement the design policy or tool. The next is engaging with impact. This provides guidance on community and stakeholder engagement, including inclusive engagement, and really highlights the importance of early engagement. Evidence shows how spatial analysis can help shape the vision and spatial strategy. Vision and scope, so how this spatial analysis can be used to inform a locally distinctive vision. Testing and developing, so using insight from the spatial analysis to develop options. And implementation, planning for long-term management during adoption and implementation. So on the next slide, we talk about design in plan making in particular. This section has been developed alongside the new guidance on creating and updating local plans, which was published in draft in November. And this section is really to ensure that design is not a later stage add-on, because we know that successful planning and placemaking are grounded in a strong understanding of the local area and a clear locally distinctive vision. So as you can see on the slide there, we've highlighted the 3 steps in the design process and how we expect these to be embedded in plan making. The first under evidence is to undertake spatial analysis of design issues. The second is to develop a locally distinctive vision and spatial strategy. And the third is testing and developing by preparing design policies and applying them across 3 different spatial scales: authority-wide, area-specific, and site-specific. And then the diagram on the right, this is to explain the wider context and how different design tools can be used at the various stages of the development plan process. It's really, this is really to help and assist with something in a lot of cases you'll be doing already. So we aren't asking for additional steps. It's just to more explicitly say how design and placemaking issues can be considered through these steps. Similarly, with the evidence base, this is information you're likely to be collating already. It's just good to have in one place here. So moving on to design tools. The use of design tools such as master plans, design codes, and design guides can help secure design quality from planning to implementation. This is bringing the focus back to clarifying the role of a range of design tools, not just design codes. Whilst there is guidance on master plans in the existing PPG on design process and tools, this updated guidance takes a more balanced approach. And in the guidance, we're being really clear on the steps to develop these tools, like resourcing and explaining how they can be used through and across different spatial scales. And for clarity on authority-wide design codes in particular, while we are no longer proposing to mandate them, the Pathfinder programme did show the benefits This guidance is aimed at assisting you to develop them should you decide this is something your local approach would benefit from. So it's really retaining that flexibility to develop them. And as mentioned earlier about giving greater prominence to design review in the NPPF, there is expanded guidance on this, including what design review can be used for, how an effective design review panel operates, and how an effective review of a development proposal can be undertaken. And finally, on part 2, we set out how design can be integrated into the decision-making process. A lot of this content, again, was in the design process, or is in the design process and tools PPG. We have brought it up to date and expanded on certain elements. And this diagram provides a summary of how design codes can be used at different stages, including before an application is submitted, after it's submitted, and post-permission. The guidance also sets out that design details in a planning application should be proportionate to the application type and has a section outlining appropriate design information for different application types. And these include householder applications, full planning applications, outline applications, reserved matters, and hybrid planning applications. So I'm going to hand over now to Holly, who's going to talk you through part 3 of the guidance.
Thanks, Lucy. So hi, everyone. I'm Holly Lang, and I'm an urban designer in the design and placemaking team. And as Lucy said, I'm going to take you through part 3 of the PPG, which covers guidance on setting effective design codes. So the content of this section is largely expanded and updated content, which seeks to deliver the same policy intent of the National Model Design Code, or NMDC, and it draws on the structure of the NMDC Part 2. The main updates include reflecting the consolidation of the 10 characteristics into the 7 features of well-designed places, which Lucy took you through and is covered in part 1 of the guidance. Removing content which creates duplication with other standards, and finally expanding the existing guidance to be really clear about how to set definitive standards rather than guidance, with any design principles that are in the current NMDC being moved to part 1 of the guidance. So the diagram on the right updates the design code coverage diagram in the current NMDC and aligns it with the 7 features. This isn't a closed list, and it's also not intended to be used as a checklist when preparing your own local design code. These are the issues that design codes can cover rather than issues that design codes must cover. You'll notice, if you've been studying this in detail, that there have been some deletions, for example, where issues were covering something which is covered by building regs. And you'll also see that only 6 of the 7 features have been included in this list, with livability being treated slightly differently. So this is because livability can't be defined by a single design code for a specific built parameter, but is instead kind of achieved through a combination of carefully balanced design codes across the remaining 6 features of well-designed places. So we have therefore included a section which describes where design codes can be set for different design issues in conjunction with one another to achieve the principles of livability set out in part 1. So we'll move on to the next slide now, which sets out how the guidance is structured to provide clear guidance on setting effective design codes for each of the design issues. So through the update, we have expanded and clarified the existing guidance and structured it in a way that firstly sort of clearly sets out how to set a definitive requirements for each of the design issues. And here we've tried to be really clear how to go about setting a definitive design code rather than guidance. We then move on to setting which design principle this delivers and the reason, and this link back, this essentially sort of directly quotes text in part 1 of the guidance into the 7 features. We then move on to coverage, which describes the areas or development types it's appropriate to set requirements for. And here we essentially go into further guidance on where it might be appropriate to code for each issue. So for example, for a specific site, or perhaps a development type that occurs across a whole authority. And then finally, under other considerations, we set out what else should be considered in the process of setting design code requirements for each issue. So an example of this might be on tree provision to work with highways officers to ensure those street trees can be maintained. We also set out how to illustrate design code requirements clearly and provide example diagrams of how to do this. And alongside the final version, these diagrams will be downloadable in an editable format so that you can use them in your own design codes if you wish. So the next slide sets out an example of what this looks like in climate. So you can see that we've clearly structured the guidance under each of those sections. And this format is replicated for each of the issues that design codes can cover that were set out in the table on a couple of slides ago. So Lucy and I have explained the structure and content of the document and how we've consolidated the 4 documents into one. Over the next slides, I'm now going to highlight some of the specific changes that we have made around the usability of the draft PPG. Brilliant, thank you. So as this is a very visual document, which is different to other parts of government PPG, we focused a lot on the look and feel of the document as much as the text itself. And we've made some significant improvements to ensure that guidance is accessible to all readers. To ensure that guidance meets accessibility standards, we've work to ensure that colour and text is legible for individuals with visual impairments. And we've also used colour to support navigation throughout the document, with the 7 features, colours being a prime example of this. And the intention is that the final version will be published in HTML alongside PDF format. So if we move on to the next slide, this just sort of highlights our approach to layouts across the document. So we have created a clear document structure where each section has a clear header, and we follow the same graphic template for each section across the document to make it as easy as possible to navigate the document and understand where you are within it. We've used a 2-column layout as it's one of the layouts that's most easy for people to read on a screen, and have clear rules for how to incorporate photographs and diagrams. And you can see here as well how we've used colour to support navigation through the document. So we've got the purple identity colour there. So moving on to our approach to diagrams, we have developed new illustrations for this guidance to help readers of all skill levels understand the principles of well-designed places. And broadly speaking, we have used 3 types of diagrams in the draft PPG. So firstly, we've got 3D drawings setting out how the key principles of each feature come together, which you can see an example of on the left. Then in the center, diagrams in plan form. So this is an example of a master plan layout. And then finally, we've got example of how you might go about illustrating parameters set through a design code on the right-hand side so that people can clearly understand what a design code is seeking to achieve. And for all of these diagrams and also photographs, we've provided alt text to assist people with screen readers. And as I set out earlier, the illustrations will all be made available to download in multiple file formats so that you can use and adapt them to your own local design guidance alongside the final published version of the PPG. So on the next slide, I'm just going to touch briefly on our approach to referencing. So we have ensured that text and images are clearly numbered and that the references for each are clearly distinguishable. So you'll easily be able to find sort of a specific piece of text or image in the diagram. So you can just see here how we've done this. And we've got sorts of clear rules throughout the document about where these references are placed. And finally, I'm just going to move on to our approach to photographs. So the photographs used in the draft PPG are a combination of existing photographs from the National Design Guide and National Model Design Code, alongside new photographs of well-designed places across the country. So these are a combination of award-winning or general examples of best practice. And where possible, these show different types of development being enjoyed by a diverse range of people across the country. So now we've taken you through the changes to improve usability of the document, I'll hand over to Lucy, who's going to cover the next topic of the consultation questions.
Thanks very much, Holly. Yeah, so the next topic to highlight is inclusivity. And we're really interested in feedback on these consultation questions here. So just moving on to the next slide, for context, we've worked with our inclusivity sounding board during the preparation of the guidance to ensure it reflects people's diverse needs. The inclusivity sounding board functions as a small focused advisory group of inclusivity experts, and they review and provide feedback on in-development guidance and policy. Their feedback helps ensure these materials are inclusive and accessible. So the sounding board has currently 7 members, including a practicing architect, campaign managers, project delivery managers, and an academic. These have been some very useful sessions in helping us improve the inclusivity of the guidance. And they've also really helped us with language and terminology we use to describe people with different needs. So moving on to the main area we are seeking feedback on through the consultation within inclusivity. This is to reflect the proposed merging of the NPPF and the Planning Policy for Traveller Sites, or the PPTS. So we're seeking views on whether this guidance adequately addresses the needs and requirements of traveller sites. We understand the importance of ensuring that the design principles we have set out reflect the specific social, cultural and practical requirements of traveller sites, where there can be distinct patterns of living, site layout requirements and different infrastructure needs. And based on the feedback to the consultation, we will assess whether additional planning practice guidance is required to address traveller sites. So back to Holly and also Jo to explain our proposed approach to model design codes, which is the third area we're consulting on.
Thanks, Lucy. So in the draft PPG and consultation material, we've set out our intention to publish model design codes later this year, so following the final MPPF. And in the next slides, we're going to take you through our current thinking on these. So through engagement with LPAs, such as I'm sure many of you on the call, and including our Pathfinder programs, we've heard and seen that you're spending a lot of time and resource developing design codes for common types of buildings and similar types of sites that occur and are repeated across local authority areas. So the intention of model design codes is to create template codes that can be applied locally for building types and development types that are repeatable across different areas. This will remove duplication from the planning system, improve design quality and speed up decision making. And we sort of intend that the model design codes will essentially be a kind of concise set of codes, and these will be supported by guidance on how they should be applied locally and how they should be used in the design and planning process. So I'm now going to take you through the two development types that we're currently focusing on. So if we move on to the next slide. So we'll be prioritising model design codes for common development types where there is greatest opportunity to improve design quality and create consistency. So you'll have seen in the PPG and consultation material, we're currently talking about two specific development types, so house builder-led schemes and also small sites, which Jo will take you through shortly. So the first type of sites is typical house builder-led sites. And we're sort of still testing exactly kind of what that might apply to in terms of scale and also kind of relationship to existing settlements. But a sort of typical example of what this might look like is new homes built on a greenfield site, perhaps on edge of settlements. So the reason for us focusing on these sites is that research has shown that the quality of development further from urban centres tends to be poorer. That these kind of sites typically make efficient use of land. And of course, land is a limited resource, so we want to ensure that we are using it effectively. And we also know that designs can become quite car dominated in these areas as well, if not considered and integrated well. So the next slide shows an example of what a model design code might look like. So following the structure set out in part 3 of the PPG. So for the edge of settlement types, really are sort of what we're seeking to achieve here is to create effective use of land and also improve the quality of neighbourhoods. The table on the left shows the range of codes that we're currently considering to achieve more efficient layouts and better design on these types of sites by sort of driving kind of considering how kind of typical house builder house types might come together on them. And there's an example of one of the codes we're currently developing on the right. So this specific example sets out the amount of the street that should be occupied by buildings to achieve more compact forms of development. So like with any design code, it is important that we take a collaborative approach to developing and testing the model design codes. And our early testing has included an initial code breaking exercise. So on the next slide, we'll just share some of our findings through our work to date. So as part of this exercise, we've brought together 6 house builders and a panel of built environment experts. And we discussed how the draft model design codes could be applied to a sample of the house builder's current development sites. We then worked with some architects to redesign the house builder developments, applying the model design codes. So through this exercise, we found that we were able to achieve higher densities still using the standard developer house types, but arranging them differently on the site. The testing really illustrated to us, however, that there's that key and relationship between car parking, green infrastructure and density, and this all needs to be looked at together. There's a real balance to be struck between providing positive design infrastructure features such as green infrastructure with things that are needed but may have a negative impact, such as car parking. And we've got further work to test and develop this. We also identified a need for further testing on where the codes apply to in terms of size of site and location. So, example in terms of location is how those sites relate to existing settlements. Some of the key feedback that we heard from house builders included that they felt there were some inconsistencies across LPAs, which can be a barrier to them delivering at pace, particularly where there's very slight variations in a similar set of requirements, and they're interested in how model design codes could lead to certainty and create efficiencies in design and delivery. That sort of ask for certainty does, however, need to be carefully balanced with a need for flexibility in some areas. And we also found through this work, particularly sort of with our work with panel of built environment experts, there are some areas that we know that aren't sort of necessarily don't necessarily need to be coded for, and we also need to ensure that the codes work together to create a degree of flexibility for site-based design solutions, which in many cases can be very positive. And then finally, we heard that house builders generally felt that the codes should not pose a financial risk or burden as long as they're known upfront in the process and can be factored in to land value. So I'm now going to hand over to Jo to take you through the second development type we've been looking at, which is small urban sites.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, I'm Jo Preston. I'm an urban designer, an architect working in the design and placemaking team at MHCLG. So yeah, the second type of site that we've been looking at for model design codes are small urban sites, where fixed parameters can clarify what is acceptable types of development in built-up areas. And the reason that we're focusing on small urban sites is that we know that small site applications make up the majority of residential planning applications. We've also heard from SMEs that the slow speed of planning decisions or requirements for information during the application process can be disproportionate on these types of sites to the scale of the application. And this contributes for them to a greater planning risk on these types of site. And we've also heard that there's a real lack of clarity about what's acceptable in terms of design on these sites. And this is a barrier to new entrants and SMEs. And it's also taking up quite a lot of resource from local planning authorities determining these sites. Next slide, please. So the draft small urban site model design codes are slightly different to the house builder-led design codes in that they apply 5 simple rules together. And these rules are fixed because they're based on the characteristics of the surrounding buildings. So together, by applying these rules based off the proximities to the surrounding buildings, these set a jelly mold for the maximum development capacity for a very small site. So essentially, they set a maximum volume for development to take place on a small site. And the aim here is to promote innovation and allow kind of flexibility for the design within that development envelope. So they benefit in terms of providing certainty about what's acceptable to speed up decision making, but also support SMEs and encourage new entrants to the market through taking away some of the planning risk for them. Next slide, please. And because they're based on the characteristics of the surrounding buildings, the small urban site model design codes can be applied to different plot types. So we've tested them on different types of site, following a similar process to the house builder-led model design codes, where we gave different architects 3 different sites and asked them to come up with a design through applying the model design codes. Next, please. And here's an example of one of those sites. So this is a very constrained infill site, and through applying the set of model design codes together, the architect was able to get an additional 3-bedroom, 5-person house on the site with outdoor space. We've got further testing to do. The codes, for example, suggest that the new building should follow the existing building line, but actually through the testing process, we found that varying that on an end terrace actually delivered a better design outcome. So we've still got a little bit of refinement to do. And obviously as well, we're kind of testing where these should be applied. They only work in more built up areas because they're based on that surrounding context and setting parameters from that surrounding context. So we're testing kind of where these do and don't work in terms of the size of the site and level of context and urbanity. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps on the model design codes, we're doing further testing to understand the size and types of site that these can be applied to, and to refine the model design codes to develop further guidance to support their use. But for now, we're keen to understand their usefulness, and we welcome further feedback on this. And I'll hand over to Lucy.
Thanks very much, Jo. So in terms of next steps on the sort of consultation itself, we're engaging with a range of stakeholders during the consultation period, including sessions like these, as well as some more focused roundtables. And just finally on the last slide on consultation, as a reminder, we launched this on the 21st of January. And we're seeking feedback on the practical application of the draft PPG rather than its overall content. When considering your consultation responses, as we've laid out, we'd like you to think about the usability of the draft guidance to help us assess whether this consolidated approach supports the preparation of effective design and placemaking policies. Secondly, the inclusivity of the draft PPG to reflect the proposed merging of the MPPF and the PPTS. We need to understand whether this guidance adequately addresses the needs and requirements of travellers. And lastly, the effectiveness of design tools set out in the draft guidance, which will allow us to test our proposal to introduce model design codes, as you've heard from Holly and Jo about. So the consultation closes on the 10th of March. It's the same day that the MPPF consultation closes, and we're really keen to hear your views on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, Holly and Jo as well. So yeah, thank you for that. We're just going to work through some of the questions. There's been a few that have been posted up. So hopefully you've all got kind of access to that. I can see some ones coming in now. We've tried to tag some of these, so we're going to try and take a few in groups. So stuff that comes in, I'll still try and make my way through them as we go, but they might not fall into the right categories. But do you mind if we start on supplementary plans? We kind of started the presentation on it, and there's been a few questions here as well. And as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of interest just because of the fact that, you know, where design tools, policy, codes, kind of, it's a vehicle very much to kind of to hold it. So I'm going to take the most popular one at the top of here about the timescale, if that's okay. I think it's probably to you, Lucy, if that's okay. So yeah, when can we expect the secondary legislation on supplementary plan production to come out?
Yeah, At the end of last year, we said the new plan making system provided by the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act would be switched on in early 2026. And now our local plans colleagues, as you heard yesterday, have switched on Monday, I think, have switched from saying early next year to soon, if that's an indication, because it's very soon. They've assured us it's all nearly there. So supplementary plans are getting switched on, and all the details of what will be in the regs is in the regulations explainer in the create and update local plans section of gov.uk. So I think we can expect it soon.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, there's definitely something about government language about soons and seasons and months to
we're
go.
Not seasonal, so I think
we're not seasonal. We're not even
closer
soon.
than that.
Yeah, there you go. Which is great. And obviously, for those people, just to be everyone's aware, in the regs explainer that came out just before Christmas, there's the proposal for SPD production to finish by June 2026. So if you, just in case anyone's missed it, it's an important date in that has been proposed for the regs explainer. So just about some of the mechanics of supplementary plan production. So as being proposed, could a design code in the supplementary plan be produced ahead of a council's local plan?
So supplementary plans don't need to hang off local plans in the same way that SPDs do. So there's nothing to say a supplementary plan couldn't come ahead of a new style local plan, but you'd need to think through the sort of practical implications of that.
Yeah, brilliant. It was definitely something I saw before where there's a sort of some of the things that might end up being set in a supplementary plan might be updates that are or additions to a local plan, that means that the local plan doesn't have to go through its whole update, or waiting for a local plan to be updated as the calendar thing. So there's a sort of a responsive tool element, I suppose, to that. And I suppose just on the other side of this can a design code, authority-wide code, or any kind of code actually form part of a local plan, or do they need to be in a supplementary plan?
So our primary legislation sets out what local plans must, may, and shouldn't include, and the NPPF sets out further details. So yes, you can have design policies in your local plan. You can have a design code in your local plan. This can be at any scale, but we need to balance this with the fact that we want local plans to be prepared in 30 months. So what our local plans colleagues in particular have been hearing and discussing over the last few years is that maybe that approach could compromise local authorities' ability to meet that timescale. So that is why there is a separate option to prepare the code as a supplementary plan as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. There's a question here regarding Building for Healthy Life. Where would Building for Healthy Life sit within the new guidance?
Yeah, so there's actually an explanation in the NPPF consultation document that the NPPF will not directly reference specific design tools as it does in the current framework. Instead, part 2 of our design and placemaking PPG gives examples of place assessment tools. This includes Building for a Healthy Life, the Homes England guidance that you mentioned as an example. It references it a couple of times in part 2, and there's also a link to the latest version of Building for a Healthy Life in the reference section of the guidance.
Yeah, brilliant. So brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to take the next one, which is the Manual for Streets question in here. So are we expecting an update from Manual for Streets? And if so, will the PPG and the model design codes and Manual for Streets be linked by similar design language?
Yeah, the answer is yes. We're working on an updated Manual for Streets, which will be published this year. And alignment with the NPPF and our design and placemaking PPG is a key part of our aims for that work. And naturally, that will include the language around design. That's what we'll be looking to see. the alignment with when working with DFT on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to move on to some of the stuff around the model design codes, if that's okay. So there's a few in here. So I'll try and go through them in a bit of an order. Actually, I just ask a question about timetable first, if that's okay. So what is the expected timetable for publication of the model design codes being tested? And you've got the ones that are being proposed now. It very much feels like there's an open opportunity to others to be added to that as well. And whether you've got an indication of timetable for future model codes as well.
Yeah. So we don't have an indication of timetable for future model codes at this stage. Oh, sorry, I've just got the weekly fire alarm test going off in the background. So hopefully you can't hear that. We're intending on publishing model design codes, the 2 model design codes that Joe and I took you through later this year. So that will be coming after the final MPPF. And we'd welcome any feedback on other development types, which you guys think would be helpful to have model design codes for as well, to help us with that future scoping work.
Okay, brilliant. And there's a question here just about will the Home Builders Federation be consulted on the model template for house builder led codes? It's a slightly different thing, I think, to be quite honest. So I slightly like this thing, but I suppose it just takes to that wider element of where the house builders sector has been kind of consulted on what's been produced both in the model codes, but also kind of elsewhere as well.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So as I set out, some of our initial work has included some sort of really focused roundtables with a select group of house builders. Through our next round of testing, we're looking to expand and broaden that and undertake some wider engagement with house builders, but absolutely it's really important that we do bring everyone on board with this and engage them in the process.
Okay, brilliant. There's a few questions here just about how model design codes and local codes will kind of interact a little bit. So and age of codes. So will model design codes supersede older local design guidance that are not compliant with the model code?
Yeah. This is still something that we're working through. So we're currently looking at the relationship between model design codes, how they work alongside local design codes, including those which have already been prepared. So we'd welcome any thoughts on this through the consultation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so here's a question here to say, if a local authority wants to adapt a model design code, does it need to go through the same process of it being created as a local code from scratch?
Yeah, so again, really good question, and one that we are working through and looking at the moment. So the model design codes will be accompanied by guidance on how they should be applied locally. Our thinking is that this will follow the same structure as the guidance in part 2 to make it easy to sort of understand and cross-reference, but will be a much sort of quicker and less resource intensive process. The real kind of intent of model design codes is that they make it a lot easier for local authorities to prepare and apply design codes. So as I said, that's sort of our initial thinking. It could change. If you've got any thoughts or feedback on that, please do let us know.
Okay, brilliant. And just where model design codes, there's a lot of talk about area types for different things. So where the model design codes kind of assume area types, is that the local authority's role to identify as they see the area types against their own place and how they fit the model codes against them?
Yeah, I think that question's quite nicely linked to the previous one. So the model design codes that we've sort of identified so far are essentially focused on specific, kind of common types of development or sort of site types. So this next stage of testing, we're really wanting to understand how they'll be applied locally by local authorities, but yeah, our current thinking is that we'll essentially set out that process, as I said to previously, following the kind of structure of the guidance in part 2 of the PPG, for how local authorities go about doing that based on sort of site analysis, etc. But still some thinking to do. It could change, and do let us know if you've got any strong thoughts or suggestions on that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a few questions in here just about like accessibility really of the documents, but also a bit around PPG wording as well. So so are there plans to make the document more accessible by introducing it as kind of a digital format with a lot more kind of click-throughs, and for sections related to other reference in other parts, as it kind of gets quite complex and linked, I think, as we go forward?
Yeah, so currently there's only clickable links from the contents page. There's no links in the document sort of from the hyperlinks to other parts of the documents other than the external resources that we've mentioned. But this is absolutely something that we want to hear about in the consultation, if that would make it a lot more helpful. We could look at this, we could add those links in the final document. We're also preparing, or we'll be preparing, an HTML version of the final guidance when it's published. So yeah, absolutely, there's scope to do that. Brilliant.
And we kind of talked about the kind of accessibility, if you like, of the document. Obviously, there's a lot of policy, a lot of local authority codes end up connecting back, particularly to the design around historically around the colours format, if you like, for the 10 characteristics, obviously moving now into this kind of 7 features. Will that kind of all be shared, the kind of the colour model, I suppose, for the spec, to allow authorities to be able to make those linkages a bit easier and design a bit easier in theirs?
So we've not planned to share I think it was the RGB and hex values, but we can if there's demand for it. So, where would that sort of sit in the guidance? Could it be an appendix or something? Yeah, again, this is really useful, exactly the sort of feedback we want to hear on the accessibility of the document. Would it help sort of translate through to local codes? Yeah, please let us know. We've, as Holly said, we've made provision for some of the sort of illustrations to be accessible. So this might be something we can do too.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here just regarding kind of specific wording. So regarding question 9, what does culturally appropriate design and placemaking mean?
Yep, so just for some context, I guess, to wind it back to question 8 in particular, it says that, do you agree that the principles set out in the draft design and placemaking PPG adequately address the needs and requirements of traveller sites? That's a sort of yes, no kind of question. And then question 9 is really a follow-up to ask what additional considerations or clarifications might be necessary to ensure planning practice guidance supports inclusive and culturally appropriate design and placemaking. So that's, as you say, that's the question. And this is really in relation to whether the proposed approach to design and placemaking that we've set out, whether this aligns with the cultural, social and practical requirements of traveller sites, where I think, as we've explained, there can be distinct patterns of living and layout requirements. So based on the feedback to the consultation, we'll assess whether additional planning practice guidance is required to address traveller sites. At the moment, we're really keeping our options open as to where that would sit in the government PPG as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Question here about viability and just how has viability been factored into the different design codes that are both model design codes, but also just generally about how coding is going to be working and other policy areas?
Yeah, so I can answer about viability in general, and maybe Holly can sort of pick up on the code specific part of the question. But really, in general, it's part 2 that has some assistance on viability considerations. We talk about focusing on implementation and viability right from the beginning of the process. But the main guidance kind of set out on viability is the new viability PPG that was published alongside the draft NPPF. So that has been a consideration when developing the guidance. I'm not sure if there's anything specific we could say about codes, but Holly might be able to elaborate.
I don't think so, no, Lucy. It sort of all follows the way we sort of streamline the guidance.
Yeah.
It's all sort of in part 2.
Okay.
Thanks.
And obviously, the viability challenges are always going to be there for every site, and there's any policy elements, how that kind of bites and the effect that has. But obviously, that's part of the testing of the codes and testing of policy generally as it's produced. So, okay, great. Spatial development strategies. So the spatial development strategies are shown in the flow diagram. How far is design expected to be included within these documents as we progress forward, as we move back into strategic planning again?
Yeah. So the draft revised NPPF sets out some general expectations on the contents of SDSs. They will be streamlined in the new system to only cover a small amount of issues. Subject to any feedback we receive during the consultation, we'll consider whether further guidance on the content of SDSs is needed. So, in other words, we're still, looking at what that would be.
Okay, thank you. I'll just do the last of the tag questions here, and I'll try and go through some of the others as we have them there. So, why has there been a kind of a change of focus from kind of very much talking specifically about design codes kind of in the last kind of few years to sort of wider use, I suppose, of the terminology of design tools principally?
Yeah, so there's always been guidance on a range of tools. If you look at our design process and tools PPG, I know it's not as visually appealing as things like the National Design Guide, and it's in the traditional kind of Q&A format, but it has been in there. We also have found that over the years, people have needed more guidance around design codes. I think as planners, we're not naturally kind of as comfortable with the terminology and the language around like the use of must and things. We also had the proposed introduction of mandatory codes, authority-wide codes that's we're not taking forward. So I think that was always sort of part of the thinking around that. And in this updated guidance, we've really tried to strike the right balance between retaining that useful information on design codes and making the guidance on other tools like master plans more prominent than it is in the current PPG.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy. So there's a few kind of questions that are kind of left here, so I'll try and go through them. I'll try and go through them in a bit of order of popularity. So as I think so. So there's kind of quite a pragmatic question, I suppose, here, but how do you get buy-in and secure better quality from house builders? Builders in different regions have very different views about improved design quality.
That sounds like a great topic for one of the next place advocate sessions. I think Steve and Skies should take note and have a look at arranging those. And I guess, I mean, really through the guidance, we're looking to set out the range of tools and processes that can support you to do that. And we'd welcome any feedback on, how usable the guidance is to achieve that too.
Yeah, brilliant. And there's definitely something about setting that understanding of the vision for what areas are trying to do, and understanding what requirements are going to be set for authorities to be able to deliver against those visions. That's got to help some way to be able to build getting localized development to come forward and get that higher quality, and that kind of recognition about what it is that each area is really trying to do, and that vision set approach. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd be really interested. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and sort of one of the things we've really tried to do through the guidance is make it really clear what a well-designed place looks like and what the key features of that are through the consolidation. So yeah, again, welcome feedback on how helpful that is. Sorry, Steve, I interrupted you there.
No, it's fine. You're a lot more eloquent said it than I did, so that's brilliant. I mean, this kind of slightly plays into that a little bit, I suppose. But design quality is often dumped down due to planning balance on planning decisions. How does a new draft guidance try to address this?
So I think there's two things really. The proposed NPPF still gives the same weight to design. So policy DP3 says that development proposals that are not well designed should be refused. And then you have our guidance, which is referenced throughout the NPPF or the draft text on the NPPF. And I think also in part 2 of the guidance, like you say, sometimes it gets sort of left further down the line. And this whole approach to ensuring that design quality is thought about right from the outset, right from the beginning of the planning process. We're hoping that kind of shift in thinking will also help this issue.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a question here regarding kind of whether so will template design codes have mandatory checklists to support them?
So presume this is sort of referring to having a checklist of perhaps like the evidence to demonstrate compliance with the design code. It's something we're considering at the moment, but need to think through really carefully so that we're not sort of making the process of demonstrating compliance too onerous. There's some balances to take there, and I think again this is an area that we'd really welcome feedback on, but what would make model design codes most usable in the process. We also need to do a bit of thinking more at the sort of DM end of things, and yeah, how model design codes kind of interact with that process too.
Yeah, and obviously you do see them quite often with localized codes. The principle of the checklist is there to allow kind of understanding of how they're being responded to, I suppose. It's an interesting point about, but obviously this doesn't fit for purpose for everywhere to be able to do so. Yeah, interesting point. It'd be interesting to see what people kind of think about that, about usability around it.
Exactly, and if anyone has got a mandatory checklist, feedback on how they're working, what helps, what doesn't, would really help us as well.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question here regarding the relationship between design codes and neighbourhood plans. So what would the relationship of new design codes be to existing neighbourhood development plans? I mean, if I'm thinking about this correctly, new design codes are part of the local plan. The neighbourhood plan would have to be concurrent and would have to be consistent with the local plan as it plays through. So obviously new codes coming forward will be looking at the policies that are there, trying not to undermine them or to move against them. But in principle, it's part of the local plan, and so would have to be would have to be in conformity to it. It's a long time since I've actually looked at neighbourhood plans, so I have to have a think about that. But to go. And obviously the principle as well that design codes could obviously be done at quite a localized level, and whether that be produced at a community level or as site-specific ones by local authorities as well as a tool. So I'm just going to, so what weight is attached to design codes when WinFall applications in green/grey belt are submitted and the LPAs are not meeting their housing targets?
Again, this is still another question that we need to work through. So, we'd really welcome feedback on what would be helpful here. So please do let us know how
it's really helpful.
help.
Yeah, it's really helpful to point out these sort of scenarios because they don't always come up in this sort of thinking. So if there's any specific kind of considerations with how it all links, then please do let us know.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite an interesting point where there's lots of new bits of policy coming out from government and obviously the effect that some of this will have upon principles of decision making, and what requirements for authorities will have kind of against sort of shortfall of housing, etc. And also kind of land designation changes as well as the grey belt, green belt. It's going to be quite, this is quite an interesting point, I think, where there's lots of new things that are going to be coming out, lots of new policy going to be coming online, lots of, sub-regional policy coming online as well. And how this kind of all plays together is going to be quite, it's going to be quite a challenging point, I think, as this all comes in, as is often the case when large changes, dramatic changes in the system, I think, occur. So okay, kind of final question here, I think, is can you apply a model design code template even if it isn't part of a supplementary plan, and having having been examined? So principally, if it's not part of a supplementary plan and it's not been examined, can you still use the template?
Really good question. I'm starting to sound like a bit of a broken record here. So this is again something that we're trying to work through, and we'd really welcome thoughts on how model design codes could be helpful here. So do let us know what you think would be useful in this scenario.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got one more kind of question here, which is consideration to different characters and scenarios to place, i.e. city centre, tall buildings, suburban housing, etc. So I'm assuming that question is going to be something on the lines of how have the model design codes, but also general kind of guidance as well, taken considerations of different area types, characteristics and places that's gone through. It has been reflected in other sessions that we've done that it feels quite urban in some of the examples that have been given through the guidance, and how much of that is related to kind of rural areas as we go, as we progress through.
Yeah, the guidance is meant to apply across the country to all of those different circumstances where there has been a need to really sort of specify what would help when looking at certain sort of intensities or densities in areas, making sure that we have mixed and balanced communities. There has been more of a focus on that intensification, but the general principles should still apply in rural areas, and even in sections like, I think we discussed it the other day, like built form, where it might appear to be more related to an urban setting, there's still a lot of guidance in there on what makes a healthy and comfortable home, and different principles that you could still apply in the rural setting.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that, and thanks for the kind of the presentation, and for kind of taking the time for the questions as well. What I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to ask a couple of our regional network leads to come on. So I'm kind of really pleased to see Stephen and the Skies here. Nina, can I just ask you to put up the presentation for me, please, just for a moment? So just so you're aware, Planning Advisory Service and MHCLG have been working with the regions across the country to set up some regional place and design networks across the country. These have been running for a year now. And there's quite a high number of about 70% of authorities, I think, have accessed these networks. They're a great opportunity to be able to share information between authorities, to share learning between authorities, to ask questions of each other. But I think they're also, as we go through, as we just kind of mentioned, quite a dramatic change in national policy. It's a great opportunity just to kind of actively learn from each other and kind of share those thoughts. And MHCLG have been really supportive of the network. So I'm kind of really pleased that Stephen and Skies can make themselves available. So Stephen, just want to introduce yourself first.
Oh yes, well, They said, well, yeah, it is still good morning. Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm a development management officer, principal development officer. I've worked in Cornwall now for 27 years. I worked in local government for 37 years, frighteningly. And in that context, I've got a lot of experience, obviously, working with projects, a whole range from starting off with very small my younger days to larger, major, complex projects. I also work and have done for many years now with design review, and we're partnering with Design West in the southwest region of England. And I have qualifications in planning and urban design. So this has been, thankfully, a very interesting project to be involved with from the outset with Steve and his colleagues and with MHCLG. And it's been an interesting journey which continues with regards to what is affecting the region. I obviously can only apply my experience to the southwest, but there is parity. We've found through our regional meetings with a range of issues that come up for each of the regions, and Sky probably would reflect on that as well. And in this context, clearly we now face a range of challenges with regard to this new set of information, new guidance, new legislation that's coming out, and adapting and fitting that into our day-to-day work, whether it be in local plan or in development management. So there's been a lot of intensive conversations. I can certainly say that's happening in Cornwall, and we're obviously going through a process, as I'm sure other authorities are, in terms of assessing, well, what does this mean for us? And how will it affect the local plan process? We're in the process in Cornwall of going through local plan review, the next local plan period, which is going to be pressing the button on that at any time soon, as the current one runs out in 2030. So in a funny sort of way, it's quite opportune for us, but clearly it also sets challenges for other authorities where they maybe have a local plan that's established for a little bit longer, and they're not necessarily going to be going through a review process, but they'll need to consider how this new guidance and new national legislation will fit with the current circumstances in each and every case. So it is very certainly very interesting and pertinent that this has come along now, and very pleased that there's been so much engagement from MHCLG to help all of us, and also for each and every authority. I've certainly noticed that with peers in the southwest region, for us to start to think about, digest and discuss certain topics that are coming out. I mean, picking up on a few, I think certainly the wheel changing from 10 to 7 is not a bad idea. I think that's a good idea, and I do like the emphasis on livability. Obviously, there's a lot of contextual matters to consider. Down in the southwest, we have over 400 miles of coastline. We are pointing out into the Atlantic Ocean. We feel the effects of weather very very prominently on a daily basis, and more so this January. And you know, so climate is a huge one for us in terms of how it affects how we live, how we work, how we play, and the relationship of how our settlements evolve, how we get around. We can have quite significant transport disruption when we get bad weather, and all sorts of things like that affect green blue infrastructure, and yeah, there's a lot of nuances to this, I think, that will play out, I think, when we start to work through those 7 characteristics. And in terms of the design coding process, that's really interesting. It's not necessarily going to apply and be relevant to all authorities in terms of the scale in which you may apply it. In Cornwall, we would not apply it across Cornwall. It's a very big authority, very diverse. Some authorities, of course, may be able to apply it as at a sort of a district level or a borough level, or a unitary level, depending on how small or large they are. But in that context, we will need to think very carefully how they relate to the relationship of different scales of towns and villages, particularly in Cornwall. Clearly, we have a very diverse range of mainly rural places, some urban, So we're going to have to think very carefully, what does that mean for us in terms of edge of settlement residential led schemes, for example. So what does the model design coding look like for us? And so that sort of thing is really interesting. Densification around transport nodes. Again, it feels very urban in the sense of, say, places like London, Manchester, Birmingham, and so on and so forth. But when you get to the southwest region, well, obviously we've got Bristol, we've got Exeter, we've got Plymouth, and other larger places. But as you scale down again, well, you're down into your sort of Truro and Newquays and things like that. So what's the relevance to us in the context of what's being proposed? And I think it's just being mindful that a lot of these things could be very urban centric, but the southwest is a very diverse range of local authorities. So I think it's just understanding context in that specific area. So that's all I've got to say, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it's really interesting, and obviously some of the conversations that have been going on within the Southwest Network have been really interesting conversations, talking about, you know, large scale development, how you deal with kind of you know, how you deal with these large scale applications, and flex design into that on a very localized level. It's really interesting conversations. Skies, do you want to just come in and just say hello and introduce the kind of the Northeast Placemaking Network?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm Sky Smart. So I'm one of the urban designer in the Newcastle City Council. So we are a little bit different compared to the other place advocates. So like in the Northeast region, we kind of like come in as a team. So like we've got like a team of like urban designers to kind of like help with like setting up the network and stuff. So it's been running for like a year now. We have kind of organized 4 network meetings so far. So it's like quarterly basis. And the next one is in 2 weeks. So in the past year, we've largely operated in kind of like in-person basis, which is quite helpful in that way. So like people like get to meet each other in kind of like a in-person settings, and also like organize like site visits to like just basically looking around Northeast, learning from each other in that way, which is quite useful. Looking at what works well, what didn't work well, and kind of like that kind of knowledge sharing is quite important in that regard. And it's not just designer that was involved in this process. It's like we've got like planners kind of like interested in design, and policy planners, and landscape architects kind of like joining the process, which is quite useful in that. Similar to kind of like Steve mentioned, in a way, like Newcastle on its own is quite like a diverse character. We've got like a city centre, kind of like a core city, and then we also got like suburban context, also rural settings. And if you zoom out to look at the wider region, the Northeast is quite diverse as well. We've got like Northumberland, Durham, kind of like quite rural settings, greenbelt kind of like areas, a lot of them. So again, that kind of like diverse approach is quite useful to get that kind of like context and understanding of like challenges each, you know, authority faces, and how can we kind of work together to kind of tackle that. I think one of the questions earlier, as in different house builder got different kind of approach or views design quality, and we felt that quite strongly in Northeast, as in one of the meeting we talk about, network meeting we had previously, as in like a lot of the house builders is dominated by a few in Northeast, and they quite often saying, oh, like liability, whatever, we can't do this and that. Then some of the officers start saying like, oh, they actually look through their house type designs down elsewhere in the country. So if you can do that in the same house builder, if you can do it there, why can't you do it in the Northeast, etc. So that kind of like approach sharing knowledge and like especially like some of the peer decision as well is quite useful on design. I think in terms of themes wise, we have it's quite a diverse range. So we cover housing. Having housing is quite a large kind of important topics that we have spent a lot of time discussing, because I think that's kind of like quite a pressing agenda for most people in authority wise. Also, like we talk about like regeneration policies, town centres, design coding as well. So the next meeting is in 2 weeks. We're going to have a more like in-depth discussion across the region, just to have reflection and discussion on, you know, like the changes to the draft guidance and policies as well. And we also start looking at the best practice catalogue in Northeast. So like we have got some really good development across the Northeast as well. and kind of like depending on the nature of the scheme, etc. We try to put together like kind of some kind of examples that might be useful to kind of reference, whether it's in the region or beyond the region as well. So I think that's kind of quite useful on that. So if any authority in the Northeast is having kind of join us, very welcome to kind of like join the conversation, because I think that's kind of like quite important kind of like platform for everyone to share knowledge and kind of learn from each other as well. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks guys. That's really helpful. I say again, some really interesting kind of site visits and learning been going on in the Northeast. Yeah, kind of it's a real collegiate group, I think, to be quite honest, as the network. So yeah, great opportunity. Nina, can I just get you to skip on to the next slide for me, please? So yeah, I've kind of, we've just kind of introduced Stephen and Skies from the Southwest and Northeast networks. Here's kind of a list of the other network advocates that we also have as well. We will share around the presentation from the session today to everybody who's booked on. So if you are interested in joining the network, if you've kind of registered and said that you're not part of the network, we'll kind of drop your line anyway, just to give you a bit more information on it. They are such a useful opportunity just to be able to share automatic learning as things are changing and kind of moving forward. So Nina, just move on to the next slide for me. Those of you who are playing around in Slido, you probably would have noticed we've kind of opened up some polls. There's some really helpful kind of questions and opportunities within that. So do please take the opportunity just to kind of answer some of those. There's about 8 questions in there, some of it about usefulness of the session, kind of what you've kind of taken away from today. That's kind of quite a healthy kind of helpful reflection of elements that have been talked about today, and what we might want to do some sort of further sessions on. Requests for further sessions as well as part of that as well, but also just how kind of your confidence you feel with the draft PPG as using that as part of plan making, design policy or design tool production, and also decision making as well. So there's some quite helpful kind of reflective elements within that. So please do kind of take the time to take a look at that. We will be keeping this Slido open after the event, so do feel free to kind of add comments in, add questions in through the Q&A process, and also kind of through the feedback roll through the polls as well. It's all really useful things. We put it all together and it gets shared with MHCLG colleagues prior to the consultation response. So it is really helpful to be able to do it. Also, it gives ourselves, but also the regional networks as well, opportunities to think about where we might want to focus some sessions, some content, which will be really useful for you all as local authorities moving forward. Nina, just want to move on to the last slide for me. Okay, yeah, so just to say, you'll get this presentation through. There's a couple of links in there, which is to both the MPPF consultation, also the design and placemaking PPG consultation as well. Also my contact details in there, but also MHCLG contact details as well, and the design side of things, the design quality notes. So there's opportunity there just to be able to post some things in if you've got comments or questions. I think I'm contractually obliged to say putting in your questions today through the session and putting your questions in, through Slido, etc., does not negate the idea that you have to respond to the consultation. Formal response to the consultation is still very much the principle and high desire of this, but it's just really helpful to be able to give us a sense of how this is landing, allowing MHCLG to be ready to receive consultation responses, but also how we can respond in this to be able to help you use the PPG guidance and tools as they become available. And as you can see, a few things in here are opportunities to develop further as well. So there's some great opportunities in that. With that, I'm just going to say thank you very much. We've finished about 20 minutes early, but so I'll give you 20 minutes of your day back, I think. But I just want to say a big thank you to Lucy, to Joe, to Holly from MHCLG for making themselves available today and at the other sessions as well, and to Stephen and Skies as well for contributing and just kind of taking the opportunity to talk through some of the things the network are doing. So yeah, really appreciate your time. We will be making a recording available on the PAS website along with, and we'll send you a copy of the presentation as well. If you've got any further questions or things you want to come in with, just do drop us a line. And I say, hopefully I'll look forward to seeing you at some of the regional networks in the future. So yeah, thank you very much.